Okay, 4 o'clock, everybody's assembled. I will call this meeting, November 21st, 2022, Charlottesville City Council meeting to order. Ms. Thomas, would you please call the roll?
Councilor McGill,
Here.
Councilor Payne,
Here.
Councilor Pinkston,
Here.
Mayor Snook,
Here.
Vice Mayor Wade.
Here.
We're all here, and I am glad to welcome Councilor McGill back after some medical issues. So glad to have you back, and we're at full strength again. Is there a motion to approve or to amend the agenda?
I move that we approve the agenda.
Is there-
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. I will note, if anybody's paying close attention, that the first version of the agenda that was sent out last week sometime had the approval of the appointment of the Emergency Management Coordinator as a consent agenda item. It is not on the consent agenda. It'll be on the action item agenda. So this meeting, as always, is divided into 3 parts. The first is a work session to hear and discuss presentations that do not require a council vote. Then we'll have a closed meeting, usually around 5:30. Then the City Council business meeting, which will begin around 6:30. There will be seating available in the council chamber for up to 23 pre-registered attendees and media, and others able to join electronically by Zoom. So we're glad at this point to start on the 4 o'clock docket. And our first item is a presentation from the UVA Center for Survey Research, presentation of a 2022 employee survey. And I have Dr. Thomas Guterbach and Elena Panzer presenting. Dr. Guterbach? We're not hearing you.
Hi there.
Hey.
I wanted to show you that I know how to work my mute button. Thank you for allowing me to talk today. We've been through a very emotional week here in the city and at the university, and I want to express again our gratitude to the law enforcement people who helped keep us safe during this terrible time. I'm pleased to talk to you today about the survey that the Center for Survey Research did. I'm on the faculty at UVA and the founding director of the Center for Survey Research. I'm now in the position of academic director. I'll go ahead and share my screen at this point, if it will allow me. I think so. Okay. And then I have to do the slideshow thing. Slideshow from the beginning. I need to flip my thing here. All right, and you can all see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Yep.
Thank you.
That's great. I do want to thank Elena Panzer is actually out on travel right now, and so it's not with us to present, but she did much of the writing on this. And Adina Kugler, very talented undergraduate research assistant, did a lot of the number crunching for us. And I do want to recognize the people who asked to do this survey, interim city manager, Mr. Rogers, and Ashley Marshall, who was really the point person for the city, who worked with us closely on perfecting the instrument and getting it so many people to fill it out. And Sam Sanders, Teresa Pollock, and others helped as well. I do want to spend a few minutes telling you how we did the survey. I've presented many times about surveys, and if I don't spend a little time on the methodology, there's always someone who raises their hand and says, how do you know this survey is accurate? So this way you'll know a little bit about that. What the survey is for is to find out whether employees are satisfied with the work, whether they think it's a great place to work or not. We also want to identify what makes them happy as employees. We want to assess the workplace environment generally, find out what can be improved, and look at their ideas, not only through the survey questions that we posed, but also through their open-ended comments, where they were able to make suggestions. And we want to look at change over time and see where is the city headed in terms of its as a place to work. Is it getting better or not? And this is the 6th time that we've assisted with doing these surveys, and we'll show you some data from previous surveys along the way. The way we did the survey was as an anonymous survey. Mostly was done online, although we did make survey packets available through the HR office for those who prefer to do it on paper. everyone was got an advance letter and then an email invitation with a link to the survey. There was a thank you reminder email. There were flyers that went out to all the staff to draw their attention to it. We specifically reminded people who had not responded, and then we closed it out with a final email. And this was all done in a fully anonymous protocol. So the way it worked is they would fill out the survey, and then at the end, they would jump to a completely separate web page where they could say, "Hi, I'm John Smith. I did the survey. Please take me off your mailing list." That way we knew that Jane Smith had not done it. We could send an email to Jane and say, "Hey, you didn't do the survey. Would you please do it?" So it was all voluntary. It's non-coercive, but there was lots of reminders. We also protected people's anonymity in various ways. We don't share any demographic data with the city. We aggregate the smaller departments when we report results so that you can't see what some particular person in a small department might think. It worked pretty well. We got a 45% response rate. 531 people responded, which is quite a bit more than the last time we did it in 2017. The margin of sampling error is just plus or minus 3%, a little better than 2017 because, again, we had a larger number of responses. Bragging about our margin of error, I do need to, it's my responsibility to mention that there are other sources of error in a survey besides sampling error. There's always non-response bias as a possibility. So what about the ones who didn't respond? If they're very different from the ones who did, that could affect the results. And of course, it's only as good as the questions we ask and people answering them honestly. But we can take some assurance here from the fact that the survey is done in a very similar way to all the prior years, and especially similar to last time. So the comparisons from year to year are highly reliable. It's another way to say that if there was some bias in the survey that we don't know about, it was probably there in the prior survey as well. And so they still ought to remain closely comparable. The way the survey is built is that we ask about a whole bunch of different topics in each topic area. We call them key topic areas. We go through all of those. We ask about some human resource issues. We ask a lot of questions about supervisors and managers. This time we added questions about working from home versus the office because, of course, the COVID pandemic had closed City Hall and forced many workers to work from home. Not all, but a great many. And we wanted to see how that was working out. We then get to the end of the instrument and ask several questions about their overall satisfaction, and that's where we'll start today. We ask which areas are most important to them. We have the open-ended question for comments and a few questions about organizational vision and demographics. And so it's a fairly lengthy questionnaire, and we're glad that 45% took the time to fill it out. Taking a quick look at our demographics, there's slightly more males than females among the respondents. We did offer a third alternative, non-binary or giving one's own description, and a very small number answered that way. And that number is too small for us to show any results for that group separately from the others. We got a good distribution across tenure and education. We got supervisors and non-supervisors, managers and non-managers, and a good distribution across racial categories. 74% are white, non-Hispanic, 16% Black or African American, and we had to group all the others together because otherwise they'd be too small to analyze without violating confidentiality. So about 10% are in the third group. By far, most are full-time. The survey was open to part-time employees, but frankly, not very many filled it out. We asked whether you were exempt or not exempt. 16% are in police, fire, or sheriff departments in the public safety departments. And these demographics are quite similar to what we had in 2017, except people are now in somewhat higher pay categories, I'm glad to report, and almost everybody's now using email. So let's see what the survey says. We had 3 measures of overall satisfaction. One is a 7-point scale. How satisfied are you with the city? From extremely satisfied to extremely dissatisfied. Then we asked whether the respondent thought that the city was how it compared to 2 years ago. Is it better, worse, or about the same? And then, would you recommend to a friend the city of Charlottesville as a place to work? So we'll look first at the overall satisfaction. Again, this is a 7-point scale, 7 categories of response. The yellow bars represent 2022. That's the survey I'm reporting on today. The dark green is 2017, the last time we did it 5 years ago. Of course, the plan was to do it every 2 to 3 years, and COVID and the other disruptions that happened in the city government meant that it wasn't done until now. And what you see here is, unfortunately, there is a significant decrease from 2017 to 24 in the average. The average on the 7-point scale went from 4.8 down to from 5.1 in 2017 down to 4.8. That is a statistically significant difference. And you can really see it here in the, if you take the extremely satisfied and very satisfied, it was almost 50% in 2017. It's now down to a little over a third who are that satisfied with their work. Asking about now and then gives an interesting result. The mean on this is exactly the same as it was 5 years ago, 2.92. But actually there has been a change, because if you look here in the middle, while over 40% thought it was about the same, now it's only 28%. And what you have is more people of a larger percentage who think it got better, countered by a larger percentage who think it got worse. So we're more divided on this question. Some are liking what's happened in the last 2 years, some not liking it. Would you recommend the city as a place to work? This also is down significantly from 2017, from 3.8 to 3.5. We had almost a third who strongly agreed it was a great place to work. Would recommend it. They would agree that they would recommend it to a friend, and that's down to 18 or 19% this time. So again, all 3 measures of satisfaction are down significantly. It's not clear exactly why that is. We're going to return to that question later. If we look this over the larger span of time of the 6 surveys we've done, these tall dark blue bars are for that first satisfaction scale. Because it's on a 7-point scale, it looks taller than all the others, which were on 5-point scales. So don't worry about that. There's the difference in measurement. But when you compare over time, you see that it went up from 2006 and then stayed pretty steady across 2010 to 2014 and then proceeded down. The same is true of the recommending to a friend question, which went up, stayed kind of steady, and then has gone down the last couple times. So we asked about key aspects of work, and we asked a whole lot of stuff. Here's a list, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, I think there's 20 of these, give or take. We asked about many different aspects of work, including personal safety, pay and benefits. We asked about managers, supervisors, commitment. Some of these are more qualitative, some are very concrete. And to show you how we did that this is an example of one key topic area. We would first ask a series of 5 or 6 agree, disagree questions, and then there'd be a summary question. Overall, how satisfied are you with communication with the city of Charlottesville? What do you mean by communication? Well, they've already considered these 5 aspects, which gives them a pretty good idea of the breadth of things that we're asking about. They put that together and give us this overall rating. And in some parts, we're looking at an average of these specific questions. Sometimes we're looking at the overall question for the topic area. When we look at what happened with these topic areas compared to 2017, there were 3 that improved from 2017. I'm happy to report. Employee benefits, people are more satisfied than they were 5 years ago. They are more happy with their supervisors. We had 2 sets of questions, issues and relationships, and both of these show a positive change. And interestingly, the other areas, the other 17 areas or whatever it was, there is no significant change. There is no area that went down in satisfaction compared to 2017. Now, having seen that, we want to tell you more about the further analysis that we did to try to make use of these findings and make them applicable, make them action-oriented for you. the outcome variable here is how satisfied are people. And we have for each area, we have what we call a performance rating. I want to be sure there's no confusion. This is not the performance rating that you give to an employee, how you doing, you got a raise or not. That's not what we mean. We mean how highly did the employees as a group rate each topic area. And then for each topic area, perceived importance and derived importance. I'll tell you in a minute about these two different importance measures. And we took the performance ratings and the importance measures, and we divided them into high, medium, and low categories for analysis. So let's look at performance first, how these key topics do when we ask people, how satisfied are you? We use the mean of the responses to those individual items, negatively worded items. We had a few, we flipped them so they would count positively, and then again, sorted into high, medium, and low. And here's where the city shines in the eyes of its own employees. And I think of it as the 3 C's: creativity, commitment, and customers. There are two areas that had to do with customers, the fair treatment of customers and responsiveness to customer needs. The city's employees feel that they're doing really well on this. Now, I understand that recently the city has commissioned a citizen survey which will ask about services of the city. So we'll find out if the high opinion that employees have on customer service is matched by the opinions of the people who live here. I hope it will be. And it could be, of course, that part of this is, well, it's always been an area of strength in the city, but it also, given the shutdown of City Hall, a lot of departments that really had to focus on how they would continue to respond to customers, and maybe that's figuring here in this result. There were some areas where things didn't, where the employees don't think the city's doing well. Employee pay is the one at the very bottom. Less than half are satisfied with that. Performance appraisals, their individual performance appraisals, they're not happy with. The relationships with upper management, issues concerning division managers, the overall workplace environment, none of these gets high ratings. Communication is all, and employee relations are also rated low. Now, we had the way we measure importance and what we call perceived importance is simple enough. We asked employees to tell us what they thought was important. So at the end of the questionnaire, they were presented with a list of all the topic areas, and they were asked to choose 4 that they would most like management to work on. This isn't the best or the worst, this is the ones that need attention most. My most important concern or issue is check up to 4. And then we simply totaled up the how many people chose it. Well, if this was an election, pay would win by an absolute landslide. Over 3/4 of the employees chose this as one of their 4 most important areas. Benefits ran behind, but way behind, just a little over 1/4. Dignity and worth and communication were also rated as very important by employees. We need a focus also on training and development. And again, those performance appraisals, they also are concerned about quality of the workforce. So those are the things that they can think of as most important.
Dr. Guterbaugh, could I interrupt you a second? On
Absolutely.
that question about they could rank up to 4. How many did most folks rate? Did they put 4? Did they put 3? Do you have an average on that?
I can look it up. Well, is anybody really math whiz? If you add all these up and then divide by the 500 who responded, no, this isn't the whole list, is it?
Right.
I'm sorry, I will have to look that up. I'd be happy to get you that answer.
Eventually, that's fine. If you had it handy, I thought I'd just get it now while we're looking at the slide. Thank you.
Thank you.
Carry on.
I will. Just let me jot down the count of responses. I'm kicking myself because I didn't print out a copy of the report before I started this talk, and I could flip to a certain page where I know that number is, but I'll do that later.
Thank you.
All right. So now these are the things that they didn't think were important. I want to be clear, they didn't think that this is unimportant, but they didn't pick it as something that urgently needs to be worked on. So supervisors, again, we saw they were very happy with the supervisors. Supervisors are very important, and they're doing well. Fair treatment of customers, we're doing good, don't mess with it. We've got lots of commitment, you don't have to change that. Interestingly, personal safety, people feel pretty comfortable about. Again, City Hall was closed for a while, which probably helped people feel safe. And division managers also, they didn't think a lot of work was needed. Now, the other kind of importance we call derived importance, and here we tried to get fancy with statistics. We used a correlation analysis to simply try to understand what drives employee satisfaction. So you have people who don't like their pay or really dissatisfied with pay. Some are more satisfied. Does that strongly affect how their overall satisfaction is when you look across all employees? And it turns out pay is not unimportant, but not nearly the most important thing. So we're looking for topic areas that predict overall employee satisfaction. So when we do that, we find that intangibles are really at the top of the list. An employee's dignity and worth, their empowerment, their relationships with upper management, how they feel about their division managers, and concerns with communication are up here, along with the overall workplace environment, which again has to do with the positive atmosphere and relationships in their department. Much less important, for example, employee benefits. While that was number 2 for employees when they picked the list, it actually comes at the least. The thing that least of all the topic areas is one that least actually predicts their satisfaction. It's not unrelated to satisfaction, but it's not a very strong predictor. And again, supervisor relationships aren't a big thing. And diversity, interestingly, is not something that their opinions about diversity don't greatly color their overall satisfaction. Yes, I heard someone? No.
Nope.
So what do we do with
Quick
all
question,
this?
please, sir.
Yes, sir.
Could you, in very simple layperson's terms, explain if you step back 2 slides, or 3 rather, how that correlation analysis works? So you're connecting a person's sort of overall satisfaction with their job here to some other factor, and the latter factor is the idea is to tease out correlations or predictions. Is that the idea?
Yes. The question is what is it that actually makes employees happy, that makes them satisfied with their work?
I see.
And so we have now information on every employee, which ones they rate high, which ones they rate low. So which one of these topic areas would most strongly predict? If you imagine putting it on a graph, does the line go from the lower left to the upper right? Do you have a strong correlation? There's a technical reason why we don't use other techniques. The correlation analysis seems like the best one for this purpose. And I hope that explains it better. So there's some things where there's a big difference in who's satisfied and who's not, but it doesn't seem related to their overall satisfaction. It's just some little thing that doesn't really change your overall satisfaction with work. That's another way to think about it. Which of the many factors in your workplace are really going to make you a satisfied employee or dissatisfied? So that stupid toilet paper roll that they haven't fixed in the men's room, might bother me. And if you ask me about it, I'll say I'm not satisfied with that facility, but it's not going to change my opinion of the whole city. Whereas if I don't feel a commitment or don't feel empowered in my work, that's going to have a big impact.
Right. But it's still the case that sort of the overall global sort of ceiling of people's satisfaction in working with the city is lower now than it was 5 years ago.
That's correct.
Okay.
The average satisfaction is lower. And
Got it.
especially fewer people who are very satisfied. Thank you. So yeah, there's a lot of information in this report. If you look at the report, you're going to see a whole lot of numbers, and hopefully it's all clear. So what we do to try to bring it together is we make what we call a priority matrix. So what we do is bring together in one chart the performance rating, that is how did employees rate each area, and then its importance. And again, we have two measures of importance here, so there's actually two different priority matrices. And here's one that doesn't have anything filled in that helps you see how we do this. So across the top, we have a measure of importance. Here on the left are the highly important areas, and over on the right are the things that aren't very important. And then going top to bottom, we have things in which the employees score it very high. This is an area of strength. Here's something in the middle, and these are the things that score low. So this red-orange thing, the hot box here, these are things that are very important, but are rated very low by employees. And that suggests that they are something we really ought to work on. And then these high priority things that are only so-so would be second priority, as are the things that are medium in importance, but rated very low. So that's where we suggest that you think about focusing attention if you want to use these data. So this first one here is showing is using our first measure of importance, multiple mentions analysis. In other words, how many employees gave one of their 4 votes to the area. It was mentioned a lot. And so here's employee pay, which was 78% picked it. Of course, it's in the high importance column. And here's fair treatment of customers, which very few people mentioned as important, so it's low importance. So let's take a minute to recognize the strengths of the city. Again, it's creativity on this one. On the other chart, you'll see its commitment. But the commitment, customers, and creativity are the areas of strength. Demanding attention the employees are telling you, you need to work on communication, you need to work on our pay, you need to work on the performance appraisal system, which seems to be broken down, at least temporarily. And then in the secondary, the next most important things, dignity and worth, quality of the workforce, training and benefits, and relationships with upper management. Now, here's another chart that works in a different way. Here now we use our derived importance. This is based on those correlations. This is what we were just talking about. Here on the left, exactly the same scale, the mean performance scores, low and medium high. So everything stays in the same row, but now we're shuffling columns based on this different analysis of what actually seems to drive satisfaction. So now what was in the bottom looks very different. Communication is still there. Relationships with upper management, division managers, employee pay now is in this secondary position. It wasn't unimportant, but not at the highest level through this analysis. Dignity and worth and employee empowerment. Again, those intangibles are also drivers of satisfaction in which you're not doing the highest, you're doing okay, but could do better. What do we do with 2 matrices? My advice is you look at both. It would be a grave mistake to ignore what your employees tell you directly is important, but you remember that they may be sometimes asking for things that aren't really going to change the overall level of satisfaction. I'll come back to that when I summarize results. I do want to give you a couple other things that we looked at. We did have a bunch of questions about remote work, and they're detailed in the report. The main outcome I want to tell you is when you ask people who were working from home how they liked it, they loved it. It was a very high satisfaction with remote work. And we asked about disadvantages and advantages, and all they saw were advantages, and they saw very few disadvantages to doing it. I will say, however, that in the open-ended comments, there were other employees who felt there were important inequities in who got to do it, and felt that those who were working from home were, in a sense, saving money on commuting and everything, and why were they getting the same pay? So there's lots of issues around this. It's not a done deal of what the best thing is. We asked employees, now this is all employees, whether they work from home or not, where would you like to work in the future? And it really divides into roughly thirds About almost exactly a third say they'd like to work from home some of the time. A third want to do it most of the time or all the time, and about a third want to do it rarely or never. And by the way, this general preference, hybrid work, home or work at the office, is matched in a lot of national surveys. This is a very typical kind of response to this question. And we asked also what kind of office space you need at your job. 45% would like a private office, please. People don't mind a dedicated non-private workspace if they have their own space that they always go to. This is sort of cubicle land. That's okay with about a quarter. Shared office space where it's just swing space, you find a space this time, next Wednesday you come in and sit somewhere else. Only 7% wanted to do this, and 1 in 5 doesn't need office space. So I'm going to take a few minutes now to review these results, not just with 1 or 2 slides, but just a couple minutes here to try to put this all together and also bring out a couple things that we haven't mentioned. So again, we see that compared to 2017, their employees are less satisfied, that roughly equal proportions of employees said the city was a better place to work than it was. That's the same as, about the same who said that, fewer people said it was about the same. I think that second bullet is incorrect, I'm sorry. And a significantly lower proportion of employees in 22 said they would recommend the city as a place to work. So as we saw, the city is down compared to 5 years ago on all 3 measures of overall satisfaction. The highest rated factors, again, are those 3 C's: customer relations, commitment, and creativity. 2 of those 3 are really intangibles of how the employee feels about the city and about their work. Very, very important, but also very highly rated. Was there a question?
No.
Lowest rated, pay, performance appraisals, management issues, division level and upper management, employee relations, and again, communication. It keeps coming up. If you look at the priority areas, your greatest strengths are commitment and creativity of employees. Each of those shows up as in one of the green boxes in one of the 2 matrices. And if you look at what most needs attention, that hot box on the lower left, if you base it on employee choices, it's employee pay, performance appraisals, and communication. If you base it on satisfaction drivers in the second matrix, communication is there again, workplace environment, upper management, issues concerning division managers. We saw that the measures of key topic areas were mostly unchanged. None of them went down, 3 went up, although many are lower than 2014, I should mention that. But compared to 2017, there's been nothing going down. And it's not clear why this is so, because no topic rating went down compared to 2017. I will throw out a hunch that this may reflect simply uncertainty, especially when you look at that question of, would you recommend the city as a place to work? In essence, the employees are saying about the same as they are now when they rate how things are, but would you come here to work if you don't know what the heck is going to happen next? There have been a lot of changes, a lot of turnover, a lot of turmoil, and I think that may be why this has changed. Another possibility that should be thought about is what happened in those intervening years between 2017 and now. And I want to mention the 2017 survey was started in the spring and came to an end just about 3 or 4 days after August 12th of 2017, a very important day in our city's history. So almost everyone who answered had answered before those events happened. And then since then, I don't have to recount what's happened. It's a lot of changes in the city in who's in charge, and more than one change in many positions. So the question then is, did everything just stay the same? Or maybe, and I think more likely, satisfaction probably went down as all that stuff was happening, and perhaps is now working its way back up and has now gotten to where it was. So I don't know which scenario is correct. There's nothing in these data that tells me what happened in those intervening years, but again, my hunch would be you're working your way up from a trough and just getting back up to where you were right before August 12th, 2017. Now, we looked at demographic differences. There's an appendix that tells you, which we've released, which shows the statistical test between each year of the survey to see what's gone up and what's gone down. I'm sorry, not each year, between different groups, race, gender, managers, supervisors, et cetera. And generally, those with higher pay are more satisfied. Those who are recent hires are more satisfied on a lot of things than people who've worked there a long time. And generally, those with higher education and exempt employees, again, those are people who often have higher pay, so it's more likely to be managers and so on. The public safety departments are quite negative on many things, significantly so. A really interesting finding is that when you look at the tables that compare all these questions based on race, again, we have African Americans, whites, and others in 3 different groups. The blacks and whites are very similar in what they rate high or low. And overall, African American employees in the city have a significantly higher overall satisfaction than the white employees do, even though they're still in a minority. And particularly interesting is when you ask very specific questions about diversity, blacks and whites are equal. There's no significant difference in how they rate the diversity efforts of their department or of the city as a whole. And I can tell you, it's something you don't often see in a survey of employees. When you ask about diversity, that blacks and whites would be equally happy with it. It's not to say that there were no complaints or no issues about it. It's an area that everyone needs to continue to work on. But I thought this was an important finding to share with you. Equally interesting was gender. Mostly men and women are the same in their ratings, except that there are 3 areas where women are higher and none in which they're lower. The female employees are more satisfied with their pay and benefits. Now, I doubt that they're actually being paid more, but maybe it's how they perceive or weigh the value of their pay. But in any rate, that's a positive finding. And all of this speaks very well for the workplace diversity, equity, and inclusion issues that I know have been worked on a lot by management there over the years. The priority areas that I show you really aren't very much changed from 2017. The one thing that has changed is, again, they really love their immediate supervisors even more than they did before, and so this is no longer as high a priority for them. And remote work, as we've seen, people were highly satisfied. About 1/3 of employees would prefer to work from home, and shared offices are okay with some. I think I've already said these things, but it doesn't hurt to say them once more. Essentially, the specific aspects of work are essentially unchanged, despite all that's gone on. Indicators of diversity and inclusion are favorable for race and gender. However, overall, their satisfaction significantly decreased, and the areas of strength and areas of challenge are not too different from what they were in 2017. So there's much detail in this report. Again, I thank my co-authors, Elena and Adina, and I'm very happy to take any further questions.
Thank you, Dr. Guterbach. Questions, council? Who wants to go first?
I'll just chime in and say, thank you very much for this report. It's a couple of things. One, it seems like we have a lot of work to do as council, as leaders. I hope that some of these results also can be forwarded to the new HR director, because some of these things, such as performance evaluations, and I know that we haven't been able to do them on a regular basis over the last few years, but those are things that I think that we can tighten up on or make sure we can implement on a more regular basis. This kind of lays out the work that we have to do as council, and I think that we have started some of that work with the pay, and hopefully over the next few years, that as we do these reports, get these updates, that we'll see an improvement. And So I may have some other questions later. I just kind of wanted to share that.
Yeah, I would largely second what the vice mayor has said. I don't know if we've gotten a copy of this yet. I'd love to be able to read in more detail the background within the report. I think that my sort of initial high-level reaction is that I'm not surprised that the results that we're seeing now compared to years before in terms of employee satisfaction, given the level of turmoil that the city has been through over the last years. It was interesting to me that it didn't seem to be the case that direct supervision, the relationship between a person and their direct manager, was problematic as much as it was people's concern with their division level or senior management. And to me, that would be indicative of the fact that people probably have had lots of concern or questions or whatever about things that are happening at a higher level in the city, and just feeling sort of a lack of control. It is heartening when I see that result in terms of people seem to have, at least based off this data, some faith in their immediate manager. And in my experience, that's really the key of a successful organization, that level of supervision. So, yeah, I'm not surprised. I want to thank the members of our city staff who've hung in there with us over the last years. It's been very hard, and we are trying to address these issues. I think the most important thing we've tried to address as a group is to set a good role model for how we treat each other, and also in terms of just maintaining stability throughout the organization. And I'm grateful for the city manager's office as they've demonstrated that as well. So the piece about pay, I think, is certainly relevant. It's something that I think about a lot. I feel like the most important thing we need to do right now is invest in our staff. That'll be a challenge with all the projects we have to do, for sure. But yeah, so those are just some general sorts of responses to what was presented. I appreciate the thoroughness of the report. And again, I'm grateful for our staff who've stuck in there with us.
Well, if I could just respond for a moment, I meant to say something at the start, which is it actually takes quite a bit of courage to do an employee survey. So we have to hand it to Mr. Rogers and to his staff for carrying this through. Because if you do a survey like this, you really then have to listen and you have to act. And it's going to take some time to sort out with the employees, through task forces or listening sessions or whatever else it takes, or more focused studies, where are the areas that can be improved and how to do that, and where you're going to get meaningful results. I think that my sense is that that's what the senior staff there is committed to do, and your support of that would really be helpful, I think, as they go through that process. One other thing I didn't mention, I don't know if I should bring the slide back up, but the report, let me just grab that again, if you don't mind. Let's see, it's way at the bottom here. If anyone in the public wishes to see this report, go to CSR, that stands for Center for Survey Research, csr.coopercenter.org. And you'll see on the top menu, it says reports, and you can click there and you'll see the full report and the appendices open to everyone. csr.coopercenter.org and reports. And I believe it's also available in the council website.
Right. And the other piece that is sort of an obvious connection to all of this is the collective bargaining ordinance, the work that has happened this year. And it's certainly our hope that one result of the collective bargaining work is that people will feel more satisfaction in their job.
Was there more clarification on exactly what staff were talking about with the communication piece? Because communication can be a number of different things, and I just want to, if we're going to be addressing that as an issue, I want to make sure we're kind of addressing the right aspect of communication.
Thank you, Councilor McGill. The way you would look at that is we'd go to the appendix where we list, Appendix A, we list the frequencies of every item. So remember, for each topic area, we have those detailed questions. And you can then look at where they've scored higher and lower on communication. And a lot of it, I would say, my recollection is it, again, has to do with that top-down communication. And it's not so much the guy in the next carol doesn't know what I'm doing. It's that I don't know what the heck they're doing up there. They never told me. I hear about stuff through rumors instead of through official communications and so on. So a bit of disconnect, again, with the top management. I think that's my recollection, but I don't have the numbers in front of me to back up that argument.
Thank you.
Councilor Payne, any questions?
I guess the only question I'd have is, again, like others, I'm not exactly surprised by the results given the past few years that both pay and concerns about communication and upper management are the biggest things that jump out. The only question I have is, I guess, what is the follow through on the city's end going to look like for like the employee dignity and communications pieces? Because I know we've got a wage and compensation study underway, which I think will directly address the pay component of the concerns. But what are next steps for those other things going to look like? I do feel confident that we'll follow through on it, but for employees who may be listening or reading about this later on, kind of what should they expect that we're taking this seriously?
I was planning to discuss that in the city manager's report, but I will give you a highlight now. You don't ask for an employee's opinion and then ignore it. You've got to be serious and intentional about what you hear. So we had a session last week on this presentation with the senior leaders in the organization, and we will be establishing a number of work groups addressing these highlighted issues, and talking with employees, maybe town hall meetings, maybe task forces. But all of that work then will become tasks for us to do in our strategic planning process. And we are in the midst of selecting a strategic plan consultant now. We expect that work to begin in January. And so it's kind of stacks on top of each other. The compensation study, the results from this survey, and in my city manager's report, I will talk about the community survey as well, that provides data points for us to consider as we rebuild the city and rebuild the confidence with the employees and the citizens about the work we do.
That's a good word, rebuild.
That's excellent and encouraging to hear, because I know this is really the first time I think we as council have discussed in granularity the issues we know we've had with employee turnover and drop in satisfaction.
Yeah, and I just want to add on to that, Michael and Mr. Rogers, that I'm glad that you're having a committee to look at this, but for someone who's been a government employee for 30 years, sometimes those could be buzzwords that you're going to study it until interest is lost. And I know that you're not that type of person, but we just have to continually let the employees know that this is at the forefront of what we're doing, and that they need to see tangible results as soon as possible, and so just want to let you know that those are some buzzwords that, okay, we're going to study it,
No, we intend on action. I mean, as a manager, I'm intentional about what we do and how we lead this organization. So we expect these action items to roll into the strategic plan. Then you, as council, have a framework to hold us accountable for what we do in the implementation.
One question I had, I was sort of curious about the fact that, and if I'm understanding the data correctly, that there were, of your 20 categories, there were 3 where people thought there was an improvement, 17 where they thought there was no change, but overall, the employee satisfaction was lower.
That is correct, and it's a bit of a puzzle.
Well, I'm just wondering whether that reflects, I mean, having taken a number of those sorts of surveys, if you ask me sort of detail by detail, are you happy or unhappy, or more so about this or that or the other thing, I may give a different answer from the overall sense of, yeah, I know I said none of those things had changed, but I'm still less happy now than I was 5 years ago, 2 years ago, whatever. And I'm just wondering, I assume you've done other similar surveys, and I assume you've seen this kind of thing on other occasions. Have you thought about what that seeming inconsistency actually means?
I have thought about it, and I have to say I've not seen it before. I mean, usually
Really?
if you know, these things, because they are correlated, I mean, you can see all those correlations. Generally, if you're happy about this, then you're overall, everything contributes to overall happiness. One theory that came out of that meeting we had last week, and I wish I could credit the gentleman who suggested this idea, was that it might be kind of a holdover effect. So again, if it is the case that things after 2017 really got chaotic, as you know, I don't like going over all the issues, you all know them, issues of council, issues of turnover in the city, and other external events, not to speak of COVID. If all those things were making it much harder to work there and people were really dissatisfied, it's possible that even though some of these specific conditions are improving, that there's kind of a holdover that people say, well, this has really been a problem. This place stressed me out, you know, something like that. So again, I cannot give you direct evidence of this. It's going to be a matter of speculation. But I think both results are real. I know they, I mean, they are, I have a lot of confidence in these results that they're staying about the same. Also, let's recognize a lot of these aren't really that highly rated. I mean, there's not an overwhelming sense of satisfaction in some of these areas. So you've got a mix of things where the city's doing well and it's not doing so well. And somehow either because of, so it's either because of the begrudging the past or uncertainty about the future. Those are the two possibilities that I've thought about as explaining why, especially that item of would you recommend it as a place to work? That's kind of a future-oriented question. My buddy's looking for a job. Should I tell them to come join us here, or is that not such a good idea? And that would be based on this uncertainty idea. Also, one more thing to keep in mind: we started collecting these opinions in April, and finished right in there as we got into summer at the end of June. So this is, at that time, the interim manager was still interim and only on a shorter contract and so on. So there was greater uncertainty then perhaps than there is right now. So just keep that in mind of when these data were collected.
Great. Thank you. Any other questions? If not, we can move on to Dr. Guterbach. Thank you so much. I'm going to look through the report that you've given us the link to it. But I think the conclusions that you have presented are certainly thought-provoking, and there will be a very interesting discussion to have with Mr. Rogers about sort of what steps now and who does what, and we'll have that discussion later on, perhaps at the later meeting or offline. It'll be a many months kind of discussion, I can tell. Thank you so much, Dr. Guterbach.
Thank you all for your attention, and it was a pleasure to work with you.
Thank you. Okay. So the next item is the Jefferson Area Community Criminal Justice Board Annual Report. Neil Goodloe, Criminal Justice Planner, to present. Mr. Goodloe. We're not hearing you.
Thank you, Mayor.
Now we are.
Members of City Council. So once a year, I prepare two products for each jurisdiction that I serve, and I serve the city of Charlottesville and 7 other counties in Central Virginia. The first of those is a jail utilization report, which looks at how these jurisdictions are taking inmates into the jail, how long they're staying, how those two things contribute to bed day expenditures at the jail on an annual basis. And then I try to draw 10-year trend lines to see how those things are changing over time. The second report comes out later in the year because the crime data is not available until July of every year. But I try to look at how Charlottesville and other jurisdictions in Central Virginia are trending in terms of violent crime and property crime and what are called crimes against society, which are largely dominated by drug offenses and weapons charges. So I would like to present the findings from those two studies this evening. So just a little bit of an introduction. I believe that the power of data is completely dependent on its source. And I reach for sources that are the best available. And in this particular case, these are records from the Virginia State Police, the FBI, and raw data that is extracted from ACRJ's system. So what I will be showing you today is essentially 3 different looks at the criminal justice system in Charlottesville. The first one is a very long-range view. This is a 20-year look from 2001 to 2020, using the older version of the FBI's reporting system called the summary reporting system. This system was legacied in 2020. And slowly but surely it was replaced during the 2000 to 2010 era by the National Incident-Based Reporting System. What NIBRS, the acronym for that system, does is it looks at crime in a little bit different way from the summary reporting system, which was largely focused only on felony cases. And NIBRS uses a more granular way of extracting data from each incident with law enforcement. So these are reported crimes. They don't necessarily have to result in a conviction to be recorded in either the SRS or NIBRS. So I want to start with the broadest lens I can. And the first thing I want to look at is a 20-year trend nationally. And violent crime, and by violent crime, I mean the 4 index crimes of murder and non-negligent homicide, aggravated assault, robbery, and rape were down 29%. Notice the little hockey stick between 2019 and 2020, but generally down. Virginia's index violent crime rate dropped 37% during the same period of time. And I think it's important for everyone to understand that in terms of violent index crime, these are all felonies. Virginia is 45th out of the 50 states in our index violent crime rate in 2019. So one of the least violent crime prone states in the union. So when you combine the fact that national trend is down, state trend is down, then we look at Charlottesville's trend. Charlottesville is down 66% over the last 20 years. Now you will notice that there are peaks and valleys and new peaks and valleys. One of the reasons for this is that the numbers are smaller. So compared to, for instance, a national trend line, which is very smooth, a state trend line that has a little bit more sawtoothing and volatility in it, Charlottesville's data will have even more because there are just fewer incidents. So any year-over-year variation is accentuated. So then we look at property trends over the last 20 years, and they are actually down even more so on the national level and on the state level, almost down identically. Virginia also ranks toward the bottom and the lower third of all 50 states when it came to index property crime. And index property crimes include the offenses of burglary, larceny, theft of motor vehicle, and arson. Charlottesville's rate is down 55%. And again, you can see more volatility in the data, but a very strong reduction since 2019. So that's the long view. Shorter view is provided by the newer reporting system, which the Virginia State Police has data from dating back to 2009. I can't show you national trends among the three categories that are covered by the National Incident-Based Reporting System because a number of national law enforcement agencies have yet to adopt the NIBRS platform 15 years after it first was available. So it would be unwise to try and draw trend lines from a source that has some fairly significant holes in it still. Having said that, Virginia, every single law enforcement agency in Virginia adopted NIBRS back in about 2005 or 2006. So we have really good data on Virginia. So that's what I'm going to be concentrating on. So overall, there are three categories within the National Incident-Based Reporting System. They are crimes against person, which include felony and misdemeanor crimes of violence. There are crimes against property, which include felony and misdemeanor crimes against property. And then there is a group of called crimes against society, and crimes against society, among other things, include drug crimes and weapons charges. Now, it should be, and I'll note this again when we get to that category, but it also includes marijuana charges. And so some of what you will be seeing in the crimes against society category include Virginia in 2020, in which small amounts of marijuana were decriminalized in July of that year, and July of 2021, in which small amounts of marijuana were legalized. So just want to note that up front. The other thing I do in this analysis is compare Charlottesville to other Virginia cities of comparable population size, and I average the crime rates for Danville, Harrisonburg, Fredericksburg, Lynchburg, Manassas, Petersburg, Stanton, Suffolk, and Winchester to compare them to Charlottesville's overall Group A crime trends. And by Group A, I mean more serious offenses. There's another section of NIBRS called Group B. I'm not particularly interested in Group B because most of the charges that are affiliated with Group B are not punishable by arrest or jail time, with the notable exception of driving under the influence. So we look at crimes against person at the national level, or excuse me, at the state level. What we can see in Virginia, it is down 19%. Charlottesville's is down 39% and down pretty smoothly through most of the trend line, with the exception of 2021. When we look at Charlottesville's overall crime rate, Group A, we notice that it sits well below other jurisdictions of comparable size, their average. And that degree of difference between the two grows over the course of the decade, primarily because Charlottesville's rate was down much stronger than the comparable cities rate, 39% versus 20. So moving on, let's look at these individual categories. Again, the crimes against person category includes some various serious offenses: murder, aggravated assault, kidnapping, human trafficking, rape, other sex offenses, and also includes simple assault, which is a misdemeanor. Statewide, there was a decline of 12% in the rate per capita from 2012 to 2021. In Charlottesville, that decrease was 36%. And again, you can see this uptick between 2020 and 2021. Down strongly from 2016 to 2020. And again, when we compare those rates with comparable cities, we see that Charlottesville sits well below the average of the other peer cities. And that difference increases over time due to Charlottesville's 36% drop versus the 15% drop among comparable cities. Moving on to the crimes against property rate. These include mix of misdemeanors and felonies, arson, robbery, burglary, forgery, fraud, vandalism, embezzlement, extortion. For some reason, robbery is included as a property crime. I don't understand that designation, but that's the way it's set up. So that's the way I'm measuring it, along with larceny, motor vehicle theft, and stolen property. And when we look at the state decline, it's down more significantly than is the crimes against person category. Charlottesville's is down 38% compared to the 28% state average. When we look at peer cities, they're a lot closer together than they are for either the overall crime rate or for the crimes against person rate. And in fact, virtually indistinguishable in 2021. Yet the rate of fall for Charlottesville's is greater than the peer cities over that time frame. Now, probably the greatest difference between state trends and Charlottesville's trends are in the crimes against society category. And these include narcotics, weapons, illegal gambling, pornography, prostitution, and animal cruelty. The rate was actually up and trending up fairly strongly at the state level until the onset of the COVID pandemic. And then there was a significant drop between 2019 and 2021, which dragged the trend line down to just a 3% increase. Meanwhile, Charlottesville had a significant drop of 57%. And this began way back in 2014 and accelerated in 2017. Does not appear to have been significantly impacted by the two COVID years. When we look at the difference between comparable cities and we look at Charlottesville, from all the way back in 2012, there was a significant difference between the crimes against society rate in Charlottesville and peer cities. And again, that difference just grew larger and larger over the course of that 10-year time frame. So that's the look from the crime side of the equation. One of the things I was interested in when I was putting this presentation together was whether the reduction in crime, overall crime in Charlottesville, was in any way mirrored by Charlottesville's jail utilization trends. So I certainly need to thank Superintendent Coomer at the jail. He's been a terrific partner in my work. Without his cooperation on a yearly basis, none of what you're about to see would be possible. So first of all, some definitions. An intake is a person taken into the jail on a Charlottesville charge. Doesn't matter how long they stay, doesn't matter how many charges they have against them. I took weekenders out because there was a change in the operational system at the jail that counted weekenders differently. So I took them completely out of the equation for this analysis. But what I found is there was a 40% reduction in Charlottesville's intake volume at ACRJ between 2011 and 2021, consistent with a 39% decrease in reported Group A crime. And nearly all of that took place after 2017. When we factor in the moderate growth in the city's population over this time frame, the intakes per 1,000 residents was down 44% over that period of time. What this means for the jail is that Charlottesville now takes in, or Albemarle ACRJ takes in fewer Charlottesville inmates as a percentage of overall intake volume than they did 10 years ago. And Albemarle, even though their numbers are down as well, they've actually had an increase in their intake percentage of the overall volume because Charlottesville's has dropped so substantially. And Nelson County's has doubled. So I went on to look at some of these intake data by demographics. We can see that there was a similar drop between black inmates and white inmates taken into the jail on Charlottesville charges, although these are real numbers, these are not rates. So this shows significant disproportionality in intakes of black inmates based on their 18% share of the general population in the city. We see that male intakes and female intakes were down essentially the same, but far more males taken in than females. Then I looked at age. And I think one of the most interesting things that I'm seeing running through the data, and this is running through it at the national level and at the state level, and both jails I serve, the number of young people age 18 to 24 who are entering jail or getting arrested statewide is down between 50 and 65% wherever I look. And I think that bodes well for the future, that young people are simply not being arrested and taken into custody at anywhere near the rates they were just 10 years ago. And in fact, the intake rate was down for every age demographic that I looked at, but down most strongly among the youngest inmates. All right, so now for another definition. A booking is a charge. So I can be brought in on 5 bookings at the same intake event. So the best way to look at volume into the jail is intakes. The best way to look at the kinds of things they're being brought in on is by looking at bookings. And so I identified over the 10-year term the top 10 charge types by booking volume. and they were alcohol offenses, assault, probation violations, DWI, narcotics violations, larceny, contempt of fraud, contempt of court, fraud, operator's license, and weapons offenses in descending rank order of intake volume. I then looked at how they changed over the course of the 10 years. And first of all, if you look on the far left, the number of individuals taken into the jail on alcohol offenses has absolutely plummeted. If you look on the far right, the number of individuals being taken into the jail on weapons offenses has increased substantially. And in 2021, weapons have gone from 10th place to about 5th. Representing an 88% increase. What we didn't see is any enormous increase in intakes for assault. The biggest reductions were alcohol, WI, narcotics, fraud, and operator's license charges, most of them suspended operator's license. Given the fact that booking volume was down so strongly for some of these other things, and even though probation violations only increased 7%, in fact, all of these were below that zero threshold, means that the percentage of probation violations as a booking, as a percentage of booking volume was up 53%. From about 7% to almost 11.
Was that because there were fewer probation violations, or because the other number was changing so much?
It's not so much a factor. I mean, if you look at the raw data, you can see that there's a tent-like pattern. Actually, there's a tent-like pattern in a number of these, but particularly probation violations. The highest year was in 2018, and then there was a trail off during the first pre-COVID years, and then a leveling off. I do think it's important to note how some of these changed during 2020 and 2021. Alcohol was dead low. There was an uptick in assaults in 2021. There was an uptick in weapons offenses in 2021. And just about all of these, 2021 and 2020 were suppressed, or in some cases level with preceding years. And I think it's important to note that there was a difference between the trend of felony probation violations and misdemeanor probation violations during the time frame. But again, both of them down starting in 2017, after both the state probation office and the local probation office began using an intermediate sanction matrix that had significant difference in the way that these trend lines were heading. All right, so if intakes and bookings are one leg of the stool, the second leg of the stool is the average length that an inmate stays. And this is important because if I have 365 inmates who come in and spend a day, and I have one inmate who comes in and spends 365 days, that's the exact same number of bed day expenditures and exact same cost to house 365 versus one inmate. So if the average length of stay is increasing, that means there's the potential for cost implication. In fact, we do see that the average length of stay has been creeping up since 2017. One of the reasons for this is that in terms of felony versus misdemeanor bookings, the number of misdemeanor bookings has been dropping while the number of felony bookings has been rising at a slower pace. So if it stands to reason, if your felon to misdemeanor ratio is rising, that this average length of stay would rise because you have folks in the jail who have committed more serious offenses. We see that there's actually been a reduction in the average length of stay of black inmates, while there's been a 16% increase among white inmates. Having said that, black inmates still serve nearly twice the average length of stay of a white inmate at the jail. Female inmate average length of stay was up 10%. Male intake rate generally did not move, but you can see it was on the rise starting in about 2018. Again, males serve significantly longer average length of stays than females do. Here's the look by age. And I want to draw your attention to the right side of this graph, to the average length of stay of individuals over age 50 who are there on Charlottesville charges, up 62%. So even though there were fewer inmates age 50 getting taken into the jail, they're staying significantly longer. And this is something that I've been delving into. I don't have time to talk about it tonight, but there is a significant sub-cohort of the jail, older inmates, many of whom have been in trouble with the law for years and years, done multiple jail and prison periods of incarceration, have been on probation a number of times and failed under probation, and they just can't seem to exit the system. So the last of the three legs of the stool are bed day expenditures. And bed day expenditures are simply a product of taking the intake volume and multiplying it by the length of stay. And as you're looking at this data, I want you to keep in mind that as of the 2020 Compensation Board jail cost report, a day for an ACRJ inmate is $112.68. So Charlottesville's intake volume was down so strongly that it made the very slight increase in average length of stay virtually meaningless, because bed day expenditures were down 41%. And you will see this in terms of your required contribution to the jail over the next couple of years. Even down more strongly when we look at it per capita. And once again, we notice this shifting, whereas 10 years ago, Charlottesville had nearly 50% of the bed day expenditures at the jail, and now it's more like 34. Whereas Albemarle's expenditures have also gone down, but just not as strongly. And Nelson's have climbed from about 8% to 17%. When we look at expenditures as a function of demographics, we can see that there's a very similar reduction among black and white inmates. But again, there is significant disproportionality in bed day expenditures for black inmates, given that they represent less than 20% of Charlottesville's population. We see similar reductions between males and females. What we see among different age groups is that, again, the youngest inmates are consuming nearly a third of the bed days they were 10 years ago. And the age 25 to 29 cohort is right behind them. Also strongly down was the age 40 to 49 group. But there we have over on the right, this cohort of folks over the age of 50 who are actually expending more bed days than they were 10 years ago against the backdrop of bed day expenditures down overall 41%. So that makes that 19% even more significant. And the last thing I want to talk about is what makes longer staying inmates such a powerful influence on overall how many inmates are in the jail from Charlottesville on an average day. So you can see that the number of individuals who are staying plus 30 days was down 22%. But that was half the drop in the inmate population who stayed 30 days or less. And that's, again, and I think that's an indicator of fewer misdemeanants getting booked into the jail and those misdemeanants who are in the jail being released sooner. So when you put those two drops together, what you end up with is a larger percentage of the jail on an average daily basis holding inmates who are there for 30 days or longer than 30 days. And the reason that this is important is this 32% of inmates are consuming over 90% of the bed days in the jail for the city. So that's essentially my presentation. I'm going to end here because I just would be recapping what I've already said and take some time for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Goodloe. Staff, council, have any questions?
Try to be quick, but one of them is my understanding when it comes to the average length of stay is during the pandemic, there was a statewide policy to try to encourage people to stay in jails rather than be transferred to state prisons. Did you pick up that was having any effect on the average length of stay?
It was having a considerable effect on length of stay. And interestingly enough, I've been following the average daily population reports from the Comp Board in 2022, and I have data as fresh as September of this year. And along about maybe March or April of this year, the Department of Corrections began taking in inmates at a rate that I have not observed previously. And according to Superintendent Coomer, whereas 6 months ago he would have had over 100 state custody inmates in the facility, he now has around 30.
Wow. The other is Nelson is kind of vastly growing in the amount of inmates that they're sending to the jail. Do we have any sense of what is driving that?
I think if you ask them, I think methamphetamine is a big driver of their criminal justice challenge.
Okay. And the final question I have is, there was that one data point, I think, for weapons charges that was a 60%, I think. For the other data showing that, like, on a longer-term time horizon, violent crime is down. Did you have any data that was basically just looking at gun violence in isolation in terms of homicides and other gun-related charges?
So I resist the urge to look at homicide because the base rates are so low that it's
Right.
impossible to draw any conclusions year over year. It's just a complete, and actually I charted it out and it was so completely sawtooth that I didn't feel comfortable presenting it. I have looked at the difference between simple assault and aggravated assault. And simple assaults occur about 5 times as frequently as aggravated assaults do, and have dropped substantially over the last 10 years, whereas aggravated assaults have held fairly steady over the 10-year time frame.
Right. Okay, all very helpful. And what I wonder with that is my understanding of national crime statistics is overall crime continues to be down, but at least in some areas there was a very specific problem of shootings going up, even though other violent crimes were still decreasing. And I'm wondering if we saw that dynamic locally at all. But regardless, I mean, I think it's really important context, given some of the national narratives, that crime is down massively, and we may be dealing with a specific gun violence issue that we need to take very seriously. But to me, this is indication that some of these national narratives of criminal justice reform or reduced use of jails leading to an increase in crime is not borne out in the data that we're seeing. In that really our biggest focus is, continuing these mental health challenges, diversionary programs. In some ways, it's encouraging to see that our use of the jail is going down.
I think it's also worth noting, and I think this is in the materials I provided to council, but not in my presentation. The United States is leading incarcerator in the world. If you took all of the U.S. states and counted them as if they were countries, they would be number 1 through number 36 in the world in incarceration. So we are an outlier as a country to start with. Secondly, Virginia tends to incarcerate a higher percentage of its citizens as a function of its crime rate than most other states do. So I was interested in that, and I looked at ACRJ's incarceration rates as a function of the crime rates in Charlottesville, Albemarle, and Nelson, and compared them then to the incarceration rates in the other 25 regional jails in Virginia. And ACRJ had the 3rd lowest incarceration rate. And when you factored in the crime rates for the member jurisdictions, it had the absolute lowest crime to incarceration rate of all 26 jails in Virginia, all 26 regional jails.
Yeah. And final thought, hearing that, which is very interesting, is to me is a sign that kind of turning to alternatives to incarceration to get to that low, we're not seeing that lead to an increase in crime here, which to me, again, is encouraging that to hear that, not to rest on our laurels, but to kind of continue those reform efforts. But that's all I have. Thank you. Very, very informative.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Other counselors?
Yeah, I agree. It was very informative, very enlightening to see the global trends. So thank you. I appreciate the presentation. A lot to think about for sure.
Yes, likewise, with my kind of professional work hat on, we get this information and kind of job readiness, and it's very encouraging. And I think a lot has to do with the leadership, not only at the city and the county, but also at the jail, and having this type of information that's available that we can see. And I understand that actions get, the headlines, but this is actually what's happening. And I understand we have to deal with the perception, but this is, proof that the steps that we're taking is making a difference, and we're not seeing a big uptick in crime or any uptick in crime. And it's one of those things, if you have really low numbers and 1 or 2 things happen, it can have a big impact. I mean, at least if you're looking at the numbers. So this is very encouraging. So thank you very much.
The one question I had is there any way that you have for controlling for differences in reporting rates? For example, we know that there are certain portions of the community that are so distrustful of the criminal justice system that they don't want to participate in prosecutions, and I would infer from that also that they don't report a number of crimes. Is there any way to know whether that has changed any in the last 10 years?
I don't think there'd be any way of knowing it at the local level. The federal government, the FBI, does a a crime survey, which is probably the best look at unreported crime. I would need to look at that year over year to see if there have been any changes nationally in people's willingness to report crime. I think it's a particularly important question to ask during the COVID era.
Yeah, okay. Well, if nobody else has any other questions, let me just say, Mr. Goodloe, I always appreciate the wisdom that we can glean from actually having information as opposed to often political rhetoric. And this is the kind of information that I think is very useful. And as other counselors have said, I think it helps confirm, for me at least, it helps confirm the notion that in trying to have shorter jail sentences, in terms of having more rehabilitation efforts, and all of these criminal justice reforms over the last 5 years in particular, that they've got us going in the right direction, and certainly not, as some would suggest, in the wrong direction. So anyway, thank you so much. Appreciate your
Thank you.
joining us.
I would like to recognize Councilor McGill, who has served on our EBDM policy team locally. Also she's a member of the Jefferson Area Community Criminal Justice Board. I would also like to recognize Hosea Mitchell, who has served the city admirably on the CCJB as well. And I'm very grateful to both of them. They've been very active and helpful.
Thank you. Appreciate it. All right, council, that is our 4 o'clock docket. Our next item is there a motion to go into closed session? Who wants to read that motion?
Yes. Pursuant to Section 2.2-3712 of the Virginia Code, I hereby move that the City Council close this open meeting and convene within a closed meeting as authorized by Virginia Code Section 2.2-3711, A3 and A8 for discussion or consideration of the acquisition of real property for a public purpose or the disposition of publicly held real property where discussion in an open meeting would adversely affect the bargaining position or negotiating strategy of the public body, 701 East Market Street and 100 Rio Road East, and consultation with legal counsel regarding the above referenced matters.
Is there a second to that motion?
Second?
All in favor? I guess we have to, we can do this voice vote. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, that motion carries. We will now go into closed session. We will come back into open session at roughly 6:30. And if there's anybody who is watching now, please rejoin us at 6:30. Thank you.